Welcome everybody. We are recording this session for to go onto our YouTube channel and be sent out as a link to everybody after the event. So if anyone is shy, please turn your cameras off. But it is lovely to see everybody as well on the screen. So please do stay on if you don't mind being recorded. And we will crack on. So firstly, thank you everybody for coming and for attending. This is now our 7th Lunch and Learn as Building Safety Register. So it's amazing to see so many of you coming. For anybody that's here for the first time, welcome. If you want to look at the back catalogue, it is on our YouTube channel. So if you just search Building Safety Register on YouTube, you can watch the previous 6. And if you've been to most of them or all of them so far, then thank you for sticking with us and keeping on attending. It's really good to see all of you. So the first order of business is today I had Simon Lay as my expert contributor. Unfortunately, he has been waylaid today by a family emergency. So rather than try and dial in from a Costa in a hospital, he has decided that he can't join us. And so we did have a good briefing call before. So first of all, just sending best wishes to Simon when he watches this and to his family, and hope everything's okay. And hopefully I will get him back onto another one of these very soon when he hasn't got the family issue to deal with. But we did have a good pre-briefing call. So, and I've known Simon for a long time, so I've got a good idea of what motivates him and his view on data in this whole subject. So I will try and fill in the blanks. The other people I would like to help me fill in the blanks, please, is you guys that are watching. Please throw your comments into the messages on the screen, or put your hand up, or ask to come off mute, and we'll be a lot more sort of free-flowing, because normally I go to my contributor for a conversation about things, but I've got nobody to talk to, so I'm hoping I can talk to you guys more. So I will crack on without further ado. And that is, if I can get my computer to work. So to introduce Simon, who's not here, many of you will know Simon as a fire engineer, and some of you will also know him as a PhD researcher. So I think he's about 6 or 7 months into his PhD. And in that PhD, I won't try and explain the title of it because I've forgotten, but effectively he's looking at how data can be used in fire engineering to effectively model risk more effectively at lower cost, quicker, using machine learning, etc. So a lot of that work that he's looking into relies on having a good pool of data sitting underneath it. So actually he can plug into his models that he's building various attributes to try and predict outcomes. He was talking about CFD modeling or replacing CFD modeling with a machine learning system that he's testing. So this is really what he's into, and unfortunately I won't try and speak for him on that, but it was really interesting stuff that he's doing, and it really does align with a lot of work that Rich and myself have been doing over many years with the team, of actually looking and saying, how can we use data to actually automate as many of these processes as possible, or make them more reliable than they currently are, where effectively people have risk assessments, for example, and you're sort of trying to guess likelihood and impact. Could we actually put some numerical measures behind that are data driven? So that's a lot of what we spend a lot of time talking about in our little bubble of strange data driven weirdness that hopefully a lot of you guys will enjoy and also get pleasure out of being involved in. Otherwise you probably wouldn't be here today. So first of all, the public register of HRBs, this I just reminded myself of when this went live, and it was the 8th of February 2024 that the Building Safety Regulator put the register live. Enshrined in the Building Safety Act was effectively to say that all of the registered higher risk buildings would appear on a public register, and that register would be maintained by the regulator. And it says there, the second bullet, provide transparency to the public effectively, so they can look up higher risk buildings, and then they can sort of inform on regulatory oversight, etc., etc. And that was meant to make residents confident in the system. So that was the aim, which I think is an entirely laudable aim. What we actually got was something slightly less exciting than is made out there in that sort of, in that overview. we got this. And I don't know, what would be good actually is if everyone could chuck a thumbs up for people that have actually engaged with this public register so far. Have we got anybody that hasn't visited this register yet and had a play with it? Right, so it's looking like, yeah, loads of thumbs up coming up, right? So I'm going to assume, for the purposes of this conversation, that you've all been and visited at least once. For those of you that haven't, this is the address for the register, and that will be in the notes that we send out. There'll be the link, so you can click on the link and go to it. I have it bookmarked because it can be somewhat difficult to find if you can't remember the address. And it sits on the .gov web infrastructure, and for anyone that hasn't been to it recently, this is the entirety of it. This is it. Okay, the sum total of the design of the front end of this website is what you're looking at on the screen there. From a usability perspective, bearing in mind the transparency aim, the key information about buildings, knowing who your principal accountable person is, etc., and actually sort of sharing that knowledge, there is only one way to search the register, and that is the one that's got the tick on it there. It's the full postcode of, not necessarily the building, the full postcode that whoever registered the building typed in at the time that they registered the building. And I'll come on and explain why that can be a bit of a problem in a minute. But that is the only way of searching this register. Okay. Approximate postcode, so a close postcode or a one digit out, for example, 8FG rather than 8FH, will not return a result. It will only return a result and help you find a building if that is a postcode that effectively was previously registered for that building and is now not visible. So that's no good. A partial postcode is a no. So GU15 5, but I don't know the last two code, but I know it's in that GU15 area or the SW1P area or whatever, does not bring you back any results. If I only know my building name, I can't search by building name. Although it's an attribute within the within the data set. The principal accountable person, show me all of the buildings, for example, that are, I know it's managed by Lewisham Council, for example, or Aviva Investors, or whoever the PAP is. That's a no. Similarly, I can't search within. Once I find the PAP, I can't then ask the system to show me all of the other buildings that are managed by the same PAP. The status of the building assessment certificate, I think this is really important. So when your building is called for a building assessment certificate, when you get your notification or your decision, so either effectively the certificate is granted or it's refused, that copy of the certificate or the refusal needs to be displayed prominently within that HRB as a physical asset. That status is also published to the public register. But again, the only way you can access or find out whether your building has been called for a BAC, and if it has, whether it's passed or failed, is to go in via the postcode and then drill down into the listing. So I can't sort of say, show me all of the buildings that have failed their BAC, or all the ones with a past BAC, or all the buildings in London with a current BAC, or whatever it is. That's not an option. There is no way of finding buildings on a map interface. And then in terms of key building information, I can't search on them, but some of the key building information is published to the public register. So that's building height, number of stories above ground level, and the residential units, the number of residential units. So there's sort of three key bits of building information that are published to that register. I think just comparing this for a minute to other public registers, and I think the one I like to sort of cite is the Energy Performance Certificates Register, which is also under the purview of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, as the building safety regulator now is, or is becoming. So for an EPC for a domestic premises or commercial premises, I can search by postcode, I can search by street name, I can search by town, the certificate number. Again, HRB number we don't have. I don't think I'll put that on. Yeah, so HRB number, I sort of added that to the list as well. And you can see certain KBI or key building information in that register. So I know if it's a house, for example, about the walls, the roof, the windows, the heating, lots of other key bits of data. And then I think most importantly from an industry perspective and a development perspective is that I can also access the API for that data set. So I can actually now, for example, integrate that into something like Rightmove, into another website. So again, we can start to actually collaborate around EPC data. And when a new EPC is uploaded, that automatically is then visible in third-party websites. So we'll come on to that in a minute, and that is really important in terms of how we develop this on. And again, if there's any questions at any point, please either put your hand up or throw them into the chat, and I'll sort of jump in and explain as we go through. Wojciech, should we submit application for HSC BSR only after we obtain full planning application? That takes, depends on council, 2 of these. That it should be through the Gateway 1 and 2 process as a part of that. For planning. That would be, I think it's not my specialist area, Wojciech, but I would imagine that would be in parallel with the Gateway applications. What I'm talking about today, the public register, is only for occupied HRBs. It's not talking about the part of the process prior to the building being occupied. So I will dodge that one for the moment. And there may well be somebody that's more au fait with the sort of the interface with planning applications on the call that maybe could chuck an answer in there that is probably better than mine. So the scale of all of this, it really is needle in a haystack, and the reason that I can talk about this is that about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I managed to get hold of a copy of the data that sits within the public register from the building safety regulator. It took a while to get it. It was sent to us in the form of just over 1,000 pages of PDF as an export. And it's taken my team quite a while to reliably recompile that as a data set. That's led us to 14,845 rows on a spreadsheet, each one being a block record or a block address. So again, if anyone's ever dealt with a large spreadsheet, anything that's got 14 or 15,000 rows on it takes quite a long time even to get to the bottom of, let alone do anything with, right? So we're talking about a lot of data here, but that's just rows on a spreadsheet. 14,845 blocks. That then reduces when you look at duplicates of HRB numbers, so unique HRB numbers. And the reason that we've got that difference between 14,845 and 13,027 is a couple fold, but mainly it's to do with connected blocks. So this, for example, you may have Acacia Tower, Beta Tower, and Charlie Tower. They're all registered with the building safety regulator, but because they're connected, for example, by a floor of, a basement car park, for example, at the bottom, they are registered as 3 blocks that are connected. So they're 3 rows on our spreadsheet, which is the 14,845 number, but they are one unique HRB number. And presented as data, you have no way of telling without a lot of exploratory work as to whether that is the case. They're 3 rows at the same proximate address because they're a connected block, or it's a duplicate in the data set because there are also duplicates within those numbers. So I've fed back in quite a lot of detail to the building safety regulator about the issues that they have with their data set in the public register. I did invite them a couple of weeks ago to come on to this lunch and learn, and they haven't responded. So they if there's anyone here from the regulator, it'd be great. If you're willing to put your hand up, that would be amazing. Please join the call. But I'll assume that nobody has. And the purpose of today isn't to go into a big long list of the problems with the data set. I think that can all be addressed and it can be dealt with. But it is very difficult to navigate to actually understand when somebody asks the question of how many HRBs are there. The answer that I can see is around about 12.5 to 13,027. That number will reduce because there are still duplicates within that data set that we haven't been able to weed out or verify that they are duplicates. But there are 13,027 unique HRB numbers. So that's probably a more reliable number than the 14,845. But it is complex. There are around about 5,000 or so principal accountable persons listed. And again, back to the data quality, you can have multiple variations of the same, what seems to be the same entity. So for example, you might see, let's take Camden Council as London Borough of Camden with a bunch of buildings, Camden Council with a bunch of buildings, Camden with a bunch of buildings, and then maybe CAMD, nothing after that. We're estimating that they are counted in our 5402 number as unique entities at the moment, but I think there's a lot of duplication in there because of manual data entry and a lack of holding a parent record as an entity and sort of saying, okay, let's register Camden Council as an example once, and now let's associate 30, 40, 50, 100 HRBs underneath that parent record. The BSR, when they did the registration process, effectively asked everybody or required every building to register as a new entity. So what the data dump is doing is sort of just saying, here are buildings that are associated with exactly the same entity, spelt in exactly the same way or described in the same way. So the PAP number will reduce quite significantly. I don't know what the number is, we haven't gone through, and we can't necessarily verify that there isn't an organisation called Camden that is a PAP. There may well be, in which case it would be wrong to conflate that with the London Borough of Camden. So again, I'm not sure how the regulator, or if the regulator is going to do something. And we can't see the registration address, the email address that was used to register that record, because it may well be the same person from Camden Council. So you would be able to clean that data. The other key point that we've come to, again, caveat the fact that there may well be duplicate records still, but approximately we're looking just over 1 million residential units across those 13,000 unique HRB numbers. So that's one element we can deduce, that you could argue there are probably somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million people living in higher risk buildings in England, based on the data set that the BSR have put together. But again, there will be margins of error on all of these numbers, but I think it's just useful to throw some of that into the room and the group, really, just this may be new. I don't know, is this new news to anybody, or does everybody already know all of this sort of stuff? I can't see any thumbs up, so maybe everybody knows all of this already, which is great. So the key point, data quality. And this is the main thrust of what I've gone back to the regulator with, that I don't think their data set is reliable at the moment, based on many, many reasons, which I won't grind through today. But suffice to say, the way that the data was acquired, the way it's been stored, sorry, the way it's been managed effectively, the way it's been structured, and the way it doesn't appear to have been cleansed, is now throwing up inconsistent responses from the public register. There is a building, for example, where if you know the postcode of it, you can return a result, but actually the postcode field is occupied by the HRB number. as one example. It's a live building, it's real, it's on the register, it just has bad data. There are lots of pages that are dead pages where we think the record has been created, then subsequently revised or updated, and it's ended up creating a sub-record, if you like, that returns a broken page if you know how to, if you put the wrong postcode in, for example, the old postcode. And this is all data that is live and searchable to the public on the public register right now. And if there was a feed into third-party applications through an API, it would be passing through unreliable data to those third-party websites. So hopefully we will get assurance soon that the regulator has got this on the radar and they are doing something to address it, or they're engaging somebody to address this for them. There are then subsequent issues with the process around, if any of you on the call have gone through trying to update your registration information or your KBI, that effectively it's a human process that you submit your change, and then at some point in the future, it gets pushed live. I don't know what the process is, but it involves, it would appear, a human being pushing publish. And one of the problems with that is around the custody and control, that in my mind, if I am the registered person with legal responsibility that's signing the declaration to say that if I put incorrect information in, I'm committing a criminal offence, that should be enough to push that information live into the register, not rely on somebody at the building safety regulator to go and do something with it at some point in the future to then get involved in the chain to push information live. So again, maybe that's something we can talk about later on the Q&A in terms of people's experiences for that. So we've got inconsistent data. We've got a massive spreadsheet of nearly 15,000 rows with various columns of information that relating to these HRBs. And again, a reminder that this is a tiny subset of multi-occupancy buildings in this country. And there are ongoing conversations post Grenfell 2 about redefining what an HRB is, or redrawing the scope, which could, if the government choose to, bring a lot more buildings into the scope of this regulation. So if we have chaos now, we will get chaos XXX if that decision is made. So again, I'm hoping that policymakers are taking this on board and saying, maybe we need to make sure we can run before we, or walk before we can run, for example, but again, out of my hands. But just in terms of complexity, I've just thrown this ChatGPT generated image of a building up. This is not a real building unless ChatGPT has stolen it from somewhere else. But to give you an idea, it's loosely based on one of our clients' buildings. I just want to go through the complexity. So there are 3 blocks here. So this would be registered as, you know, let's call it Block A, Block B, Block C, or, you know, Acacia Towers, Block A, Block B, Block C. The primary record in the public register will be the one that was registered first. So let's say, for example, we registered Block C first, then Block B, then Block A. It would say Block C, Acacia Towers, Block C, and then it would show further into the record connected buildings of Block B and Block A. So that would be the way that the to avoid a higher risk building, I think, is what you're after. So the buildings that fall within the scope of the occupation phase of the Building Safety Act. So over 18 meters or 7 stories or more at multi-occupancy is an HRB. So here we have 3 blocks. One principal accountable person responsible for the overall development, the overall HRB, which comprises of the three towers, if you like. 3 accountable persons. So let's say, for example, the bottom strip is offices that the PAP continues to manage, and then each of the 3 towers, let's say one of them is private and 2 of them are social housing with 2 different social housing providers, for example. So we could have 3 APs, accountable persons, 1 principal accountable person on this particular development itself. Various entrances might lead to a number of postcodes. So depending on where I live within that building, I might associate that building with a completely different postcode to the one that's registered to bring this result back. GeoPlace UPRN, so unique property reference numbers. Again, each of those flats and the building itself will have a unique property reference number via GeoPlace. Again, this isn't a search attribute within the Building Safety Regulator database, but is used by a lot of other third-party websites, for example, for identifying buildings. There's over 225 residents living within these 3 towers that may want to access information about this development. There's over 120 key building information values for each of the towers, if you like. So again, there's lots of data that isn't accessible on the public register at the moment in terms of wall makeup and fire equipment and insulation and all the other things that you've all diligently gone and uploaded it to the regulator or told the regulator about in terms of the makeup of the building. And then I think most importantly, there's one safety case report. So this is one of 13,027 rows on the spreadsheet or the data set I was talking about. In terms of the complexity of this, we haven't talked about the gateway and building control application that may have led up to the development of this property. Haven't talked about the information that's uploaded in support of the safety case or the back process. So again, there, the safety case report, various versions, mandatory occurrence reporting, resident engagement strategy, and then the reams of physical documentation that's uploaded into the portal with the regulator in response to requests for information. Again, it's quite common for one of these buildings that's being reviewed for back to go through 3, 4, 5 rounds of requests for information from the regulator, and most of those require the uploading of individual pieces of documentation as well as answering questions. So if we were to map the amount of data that is being accumulated by the regulator, I haven't done the numbers yet, but it will be into the millions of pieces of data effectively so far in a regime that's got 13,000 unique HRBs within it. So that's some of the negatives, but there is a massive opportunity, I would say, with this data, and something I spent a lot of time talking to Simon about, Simon Lay, around, okay, so what can you do with this data? If you've got this reliable data about HRBs in England, what's the art of the possible? What can we do? What can we learn? So some of the things that we've been able to deduce from this early review of this HRB data is that, as we can see on the screen there, you know, that 67% of English councils don't have any HRBs. They're not in the occupation phase regime. They may well have or will have building control responsibilities, Building Act responsibilities, etc., environmental health responsibilities, but they're not actually on the hook for managing HRBs themselves. 2,727 of our 13,000 are registered to English councils. So where a council does have HRBs, they tend to have a lot of them, but not a lot of them have HRBs in the first place. So it's very, very clear delineation. There are a few exceptions of, you know, sort of one council that has one HRB, for example, that they're responsible for. But in the most part, councils will have multiple HRBs, or they won't have any at all. Housing associations, again, 86 housing associations, which I was quite surprised at how low that number was, totaling 1,989. So you're looking there at about 5,000 of 13,000 that are in the social registered provider sphere versus private. So I was quite interested by that, the split of private to social within this regime. I would imagine if we were to recut the data in the future, looking at mid-rise, then potentially that pendulum would swing a bit more to sort of 50-50, I'm guessing, but I don't know. So these are some of the things that we can start to do with this data, albeit quite sort of basic and agricultural at the moment. Going forward, I think where it gets far more interesting for everybody, and again, this is where I was going to spend a lot of time talking with Simon, but you know, the opportunity that this data brings, if we can get to a point where it's reliable and relied upon. Engagement, some of the elements that I've just shared with you, but getting everybody, all of the stakeholders, to engage with this regime, you know, make the regime a success, make people safer in their buildings, is quite often, you know, even media love a chart, they love some information, they love the ability to sort of show a graph, show a trend, understand what's going on, and actually turn kind of quite boring data into pictures and insights. So again, big opportunity for engagement. What isn't good with engagement is if you've constantly got to caveat everything you say with 25 health warnings because you don't trust the data, which is where we are at the moment until it's cleaned. Supervisory technology, SupTech as some people call it. This is probably one of the biggest areas of disappointment for me when we started looking at this regime back 6-7 years ago, is I felt this was an opportunity to, because of the scale and the complexity of the entities that were going to be regulated, you know, higher risk buildings, and the fact that this was an open playing field, time was on everybody's side. Buildings don't tend to move around, not by design anyway, so they were inanimate objects. It was perfect opportunity to actually really have a conversation about the data, and use modern tools to actually help everybody manage their compliance requirements and the regulator to manage supervision and be risk-led. What we've effectively got is something that is agricultural at best at the moment and totally unreliable at worst. So that really isn't a thing yet, but it's somewhere I think we should still aspire to. I'll go into that in a bit more detail, but process automation. So this, put simply, the regulator is, by their own admission, running their organization on SharePoint and Excel. It is, I would say, beyond the realms of possibility to run an organization of that scale and complexity with those basic tools. If you are going to do it, which they are trying to do, it is a massively expensive, labor-intensive, unreliable way of working. And through the regulator's fee for intervention model, cost recovery model, that is all ending up with registered providers of social housing and leaseholders. So the inefficiency of the regulator is at the resident's cost, if you like, or at society's cost, when they're spending 6 hours manually processing some data that could be done by machine in 2 seconds. That 6 hours of wasted time is at all of our expense. Furthermore, it's denuding 6 hours of time of doing something productive, which to my mind should be interpreting what the data is telling me, what is it telling me about risk, and what should we do to make residents safer. So this is a major problem. From recent evidence given in the Lords Committee, I did get the impression that the new leadership of the regulator are aware of some of this and are looking at it and know that they need to up their game when it comes to data management and systems. Quite how that will translate into policy and action, I don't know, and they didn't give any information on that, and I don't have that insight. All I do know at the moment is on both the regulated entity side, so the PAP side, and the regulator's side, there is a huge amount of manual processing going on, which ultimately is human driven and is expensive because we're having to pay people to do it, and it introduces greater opportunity for error, human error. So it's not good. Machine learning, we can train machines to do so much now. We can train them to find inconsistencies, search for information that may be positive or false positives or whatever, but we can train these machines, but we can't train them reliably if we're giving them crap data to learn from. Misinformation, duplicate information. We're not helping ourselves with actually this journey towards automation or extra intelligence, if you like, and sharing of information with each other, building models that actually work. And again, this is a lot of what Simon's researching at the moment in terms of, can we get predictable outcomes quickly using machine modeling? We have 13,000 of these buildings to make sure are safe and maintain safety of, and then we have 75 to 80,000 mid-rise, and then hundreds of thousands, if not more, low-rise, that are all multi-occupancy buildings. We're not going to manage the safety of these effectively if we're using human beings to do all the heavy lifting. We've got to up our game on managing this process with machine. Key performance indicators: are we going up? Are we going down? Are the number of connected buildings increasing? What's happening to the number of unique HRB numbers? Is that growing? Is it reducing? There are buildings being added onto the register. There are buildings being taken off the register. It would be virtually impossible at the moment to track the relative growth or decline in those numbers, taking extracts from an unreliable database and crunching them. It would just take too long. We need to have reliable numbers, and they need to be automated. What is happening to principal accountable persons, for example? Genuinely, how many of them are there? What type of entities are they? Can they be found? And the supplementary information that you could glean from reliable information in terms of legal entities would be really valuable. But again, it's not reliable at the moment because it's manually entered text that hasn't been cleaned. Education, all of us, you guys are on this. Hopefully it's a lunch and learn session. Hopefully at least one of you will learn something from this. I know I always learn from when I'm doing these sessions. We need to educate, we need to engage, we need to upskill, we need to make sure that people are competent, and that we are sharing as much knowledge as possible. We all need to keep learning. We need to make our residents safer. We need to deliver safer buildings, hopefully without ruining everybody financially in the process. And the way we're going to do that is by learning more. So we should be able to interrogate these numbers and learn from them. And then again, really Simon's point and our point is we need to calculate risk. At the moment, the process that the regulator has got, as far as I'm aware, is one of experts reading regulatory submissions, disagreeing or agreeing with the regulated person's quantification of risk, whether mitigations are adequate, etc., and then either giving that building a blessing or not through the back process. There is very little data modeling, risk calculation, numerical scoring capability by actually saying to the machine, for example, I've got 14845 blocks. Based on the data that has been submitted that we can rely upon, run the calculation, then show me what you think is the most high risk building down to the lowest risk building. What is the value that's placed on height? What is the value that's placed on number of residential units, materials, physical location, the PAP that has been proved elsewhere to be a terrible manager of buildings versus a really good manager of buildings? What did the algorithm tell me in the absence of anything else across this portfolio of buildings? So again, that's where we should be heading. I haven't seen a strategy document yet from the regulator that's ever told me what the indication is of what their plan is from a digital data perspective. So again, maybe that's something that we can work through. That's where we're going to pause and have a chat and ask questions. So what I'll do is run through some of the questions that have come up on the chat so far. So going back to Wojciech's earlier question question. Phil Yarney's jumped in on that. It's great. Completion certificate, grade 3, etc., etc. Yeah, that's right on registration. Sarah, we had to re-register an HRB due to the original record being corrupt, and their IT couldn't fix it. That's worrying. Delete the. What would be useful, Sarah? If you could directly message me with the name of the building, it would be really great to check in the data set whether that record still persists. We're trying to work out why there are a significant number of dead records in the public register. And one of the points we thought may well be that a record has been deleted and then re-added, and we're just trying to sort of piece that together in the absence of anything else. So if you could send that, that would be really useful. They said they delete the original. Oh, so you had to pay the fee again, right? Okay, so you had to pay the registration fee again because they corrupted your that can't be acceptable. Be interesting to know if that's happening at scale. It's a difficult one because back in registration, I think there's a reticence, I think, to go to war with the regulator and get into an argument or a spat with them, and that is understandable. But again, really, it's something as simple as a record being corrupted. I really don't think you should be having to pay to register again, especially if, regardless of where that comes back to, but potentially that goes back to leaseholders, or it takes another 250 quid away from, improving somebody, adding some ventilation for Arab's Law, or whatever the consequence is. That all of these things that we're talking about have a direct impact on life safety, but also on the financial security of residents, of providers. And again, I think it's incumbent upon a regulator, a government, all of us to say, can we comply with these regulatory requirements at the most cost-effective price possible, if you like, the most minimally invasive price. And what irks me is when there are technological solutions to reduce the cost of this program that are being deliberately ignored by regulators and policymakers. I think that is unacceptable, even if it's we can't do that now, but we definitely need to be having the conversation. And we need to be looking at, if it costs £20,000, for example, on both sides of the equation to process a building assessment certificate, could we aspire to making that 12,000 between both parties, and what role could technology play in making this process more efficient and therefore less expensive? And that conversation is not being had, as far as I'm aware, at the moment. Wojciech, waiting for response from HSE case officer lead takes a lot of time. No feedback has been provided about another extension time required by. Yeah, it does not help. Yeah, so again, I think we're pointing here to Gateway 2 delays. So on the point of Gateway 2 delays, I know this is a massive frustration. It's holding up remediation projects. It's holding up new build. It's causing a lot of pain in the supply chain. It needs to be dealt with. And I think because of those loud voices around Gateway 2, understandably, what's happened, the bit that I've been talking about today, which is the Part 4 occupation phase, what risk do these buildings pose to the 1.5 to 2 million people that live in them part, has been crowded out by the Gateway 2 delay and the government's push for 1.5 million new homes. I think they're both equally as important. I think probably, to my mind, looking at it in terms of where could we kill the most residents, the bit that we've been talking about today, Part 4 occupation, is by far and away the highest risk part of this regime. There are consequences to delaying a new build, and that is important, and it's financially expensive, etc. But that delayed new build will not be the next Grenfell right now, tonight, tomorrow, the week after. So I think the long-winded answer to it is there needs to be both of these issues need to be fixed simultaneously. We can't denude one to fix the other, which I think is what has happened over the last 6, 9, 12 months. But again, I mean, I'll open up the floor really. If anyone wants to, we've got a few minutes left. If anybody wants to raise anything based on anything that we've discussed today, if there's any other questions, please jump in.
If anybody wants to raise a hand, we can unmute you and you can ask a question directly rather than having to type it into the messages.
I'll just filter a bit while people are hopefully putting their hands up. So there's no full record register generated for submitted design documents as submission, only general form which main. We've been asked about documents we were. Yeah, so this is part, Wojciech, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly, of how the BSR operate. There are multiple requests across multiple clients for exactly the same information that they should already have. And I think this goes back to the new chair, Andy Rowe's admission that they can't operate on SharePoint and Excel. It's not operable. And I think that's a key symptom of poor management of documentation and data. So in our world, what we do within the Track My Risk Building Safety Register environment is that because we're managing the golden thread, if there is an as-built drawing of floor 6 or a fire risk assessment or whatever that piece of documentation is, there is one of those. And if you want to look at it, you go into the golden thread and you look at it if you're permission to see it. What you don't do is upload a copy of it somewhere else and then somebody moves it so you can't find it. So then you ask for, I'm a different person, I'm now asking for the same thing. So I would say what they've probably done is they've probably got folder hell going on in relation to each building. And if you then try and order that around, for example, block names, you've got multiple block names under the same HRB number. If you order it under the HRB number, then you've probably got fire risk assessments, for example, for different blocks within the same structure or the same connected block. So I would imagine that they've got absolute chaos going on behind the scenes, and that's why everybody's seeing duplicate requests for information. Again, I can't say that specifically because I haven't gone and sat in their office and had a look at how they run their process, but piecing all of the pieces of evidence together and being a witness to the dysfunction of the RFI process, that would be my guess, that they've got multiple duplicate records and pieces of documentation for each of these buildings that they're looking at. That is entirely not what Dame Judith Hackett said she wanted when she did her review post Grenfell, where she said that the golden thread of information is a single source of truth for a building. You don't have multiple single sources of truth unless you're an idiot and you want to set yourself up to fail. And I think that's where the regulator has wandered into that territory. And whoever was coming up with that strategy at the time, and I know there are arguments around this was a huge regime and it's very difficult, there were multiple offers to the regulator from myself and lots of other people to say, we can help you, let's get together, why don't we discuss the digital strategy? Same with the policymakers, and at every turn, they all knew exactly what they were doing when it came to working with industry. So I think that probably, which hopefully answers that, maybe gives an answer, a partial answer. Have we got someone else? No, there's a few people off mute.
Right.
Is that Gemma just off mute to ask a question or just off mute? I don't know. Okie dokie. So I don't think we've got any other questions, unless oh, sorry, it's updated. So Wojciech, thanks for that. So using WeTransfer. Yeah, this worries me. So I would have said, from a regulatory perspective, as a regulatory compliance person that works in this field, we are paranoid about, for good reasons, defensibility reasons, legal reasons, about being able to demonstrate if a file arrives on our systems, Where did it come from? Who put it there? When did they put it there? Were they authorized to put that file into the system? If you're randomly accepting documentation by WeTransfer, and then you're populating it in some kind of dysfunctional system in the back end, I am entirely unsure how that regulator would stand a case up in court against the regulated person, because the opportunity for error is massive. Whereas if I can turn around and say, okay, we based our decision on 55 pieces of documentation. They were all provided by Wojciech, the principal designer of Scheme X. Here's a copy of them, but we have that immutable log of the fact that Wojciech provided those, but actually it turned out that he provided duff information. We are now going to prosecute. That to me is very clear from that perspective, that we haven't, as the regulator, sort of interrupted the chain of custody, if you like, of that information. Workarounds of shared passwords, WeTransfer, whatever, weird files, I would say is not the way to run a regulator. But perhaps this looks like a workaround that our system doesn't work. I'm your case officer. I need this information. Can we just go and use some random third-party tool to communicate with each other? That I would say is not right, and it's a reason we were given that we couldn't provide access into a building's golden thread to the regulator, because they, from an evidential perspective, had to log or receive all of that documentation and evidence through their portal for maintaining evidential reliability of the information. So I don't square that. I don't understand it. It worries me. If there are file size issues, then those file size issues need to be addressed through their IT systems, not by asking you to put something in the post or use some random third-party upload mechanism that may or may not be secure. But that's just my thought.
Matt, for a quick update for you, Sarah emailed over the HRB numbers for the old and the new building.
Oh, wonderful.
And they are both in the register still.
Right. Okay. So they would probably both return a record, or they would return a broken record.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's both concerning and illuminating. As I say, the regulator, I'm hoping, they have promised me a response at some point with the detailed feedback that we gave them after days and days of analysis of their data set, with a whole bunch of questions. So hopefully it may become an announcement that you see sometime in the future that the regulator is doing something about its public register to improve it. I hope. We live in hope. Okay. Who should submit documents on the HSC portal? Should it be the principal contractor, principal designer, or just client? I would need to go away and look at that one, Wojciech. It depends, because effectively in occupation, the email address of the person that registered the building is the one that gets the communication for uploads, and it is their responsibility as the PAT. I would need to check at what point in gateway 1 and 2 where the responsibility sits. I would imagine it would be the principal designer, but I'm not entirely sure. And again, apologies for that. This regulatory environment is so big. I spend 99% of my time in the occupation phase, not in the building control end of the spectrum. But it may be that somebody could answer that. And if I do get an answer to that afterwards, I'll send you an email, Wojciech, just to confirm it. But I don't want to give some information that isn't correct if I can possibly avoid it. Right, okay, so what we'll do, we'll finish up now. Thank you very much, everybody. The next lunch and learn will be on the 4th of December at midday. And if anybody, we will be sending out notifications after this with a link to the presentation and all that sort of stuff, and the YouTube video. If anybody has got ideas for subjects that they would like to talk about, please do send me something on LinkedIn, or send me a reply to that email, just to sort of say, look, this is a subject I don't think we've covered yet. Can we talk about it? This is concerning us, or whatever. And we will do our best to find somebody to talk on that topic. If it's a topic that I don't know anything about, I will either try and learn it beforehand, or I won't cover it as a topic. But I might point you at somebody else that knows. So please do give us the feedback. Thank you very much, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you again on the first Thursday in December. And the date I've just forgotten, 4th of December, I think. So thank you very much, everybody, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.